Fantastic.
Satoshi Charles Mochizuki. Hello and welcome to this next Hard Conversations. So in the last couple of these sessions, we've talked about race and ethnicity. We talked about gender, which hopefully I'm thinking we're probably going to do a part 2 on that and maybe take it Instagram live because we've gotten a lot of traction on that one and a lot of questions on that one too. What else would we do? What are we willing to bring to the table, right? So we've had a lot of different conversations of sexual orientation, so sexual identity, sexual orientation. So we're still going to keep going down the identity path, okay? And so this time around, we are going to be talking about faith, right? Faith tradition, so on and so forth. And I think both of us have very different yet very similar journeys with faith.
Some
crossover.
I feel like we have like moments where we are like,
Oh, like we have like a shared spiritual
journey,
healing connection.
Yeah.
But very different traditions.
Right. I also think that because one of your traditions is Buddhism, one of my traditions is Hinduism, there is some overlap that, like, we've been able to have...
we copied the heck out of you all.
That's not how it works. That's not how it was created. Like, what? No, it was not culturally appropriative in any way. That is not the... You know that is not the root of...
I'm just joking. I'm joking.
It's like with that... what is that comic? Oh, my God. The Indian guy, man, that we've recently been watching. Veer Singh.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I'm sorry.
No. Yes.
I just listed out
There's all these
generic Indian last names. But when he's like, the Vedas, 16 volumes, the Quran, 1 volume, the Bible, different different testaments, different books, so on and so forth. Buddhism, 1 pamphlet. I love that. Oh my God, so simple. But anyway, that was a side note. But yeah, since we have like Buddhist and Hindu traditions, I feel like we've also overlapped in talking about not necessarily the faith tradition itself, but the spirituality behind it, right? Like we've talked about karma, we've talked about nirvana, moksha, we've talked about yin and yang, right? We've talked about what that really means. Yes, and we've talked about masculinity and femininity within spirituality. We've talked about queerness within, I know we've talked about queerness within Hinduism. Just so many like different conversations that we've already had. But I feel like all the conversations that we've had so far have come from a place of, we've always talked about these conversations after having some sort of interaction with predominantly white people, and the appropriation of some of our spirituality. And I think in isolation, like now that we're working at home, is when we've started talking about how our spirituality is honing our support system, right? Like certain things and ideas that we've shared with each other of what is calling to us in terms of our spirituality for us to lean on as a support system, And so I think this is the time this is one of the first times. I don't remember a lot of times where we haven't talked about faith from a political perspective, or like an identity politics perspective, and just talked about the faith traditions themselves, right? And so maybe we'll delve a little bit into, I was thinking we could delve a little bit into our journey with spirituality, like where it comes from, so on and so forth, right? Where we are right now in this current moment. And then, I know that pretty organically we're probably going to move into that political space, so might as well just claim it, because that's where we will end up, because that's what we love, right? And that's how we live our lives, right? So right now it's 12:27. Let's say we started about 12:25. Want to keep this conversation up to 45 minutes. Time is usually a challenge for the two of us because we always enjoy conversing with each other, but we'll try and keep it at about 45-minute mark, and we should be good with that so that, like humans who are taking time out of their day have a solid chunk that they know they can depend on, okay? So we'll end at about, what is 12:20? We start at 12:25. 1:10. Okay, cool. 1:10. That sounds good. All right. So with that, tell me a little bit about your faith journey. Tell me a little bit about your religious journey, and then we'll move into spiritual journey.
Religious journey. So I will start with, actually I'll start
with kind of what I share at Anytown when we do the round robins, sort of the stations. For me, I think a really pivotal moment was my childhood growing up. I had a really tough time going to sleep at night. This is maybe both religious and spiritual, so at the same time, so I'm not following directions. But basically, like I remember like the first nightmare I ever had. Like I had a dream that I was running away from an exploding volcano, and then I was calling out to be woken up because I somehow knew it was a dream, and was like afraid of dying in my dream.
Wow.
And that was like when I was like 3 years old, maybe 4 years old. Like I remember like I remember like what room I was in the apartment in Japan and everything. Like it was a particular stage. Like I was like, it was after potty training, and it was like before I moved into this other room. So yeah, so definitely like going to bed at night was something that like I didn't enjoy. Like I never felt comfortable going to sleep. I was very much like I'm afraid of the lights being turned off. It was hardest for me to go to sleep when everybody else was asleep, when it was silent. When things were silent, I felt like it's almost like the world has stopped, and there's a sense of like, I don't know, like it was so unsettling for me. And so whenever I would go to sleep earlier and like my mom would be up and there would be like people over and they're in the other room, like there's a simultaneous feeling of like wanting to join them because like they're laughing and having a good time. But there's also at the same time, I felt more comfortable going to sleep because I heard voices in the other room. Like I knew that the world was happening. Like it's like the world will still be here when I go to sleep and when I wake up. Like nothing is going to come and get me. Like I will be protected. Like I will be safe once I close my eyes, once I'm no longer conscious. And so one of the things that was actually super, super helpful in helping me to go to sleep a lot of times was hearing my mom in the other room chanting. So she would be chanting and just like hearing her voice just repetitively chanting in the other room, like I would actually go to sleep to the sound of her voice. And so for me, like because of that, like definitely regardless of where I've gone in terms of my relationship with this religion, there is always that core of like, it is still what is most familiar, it is still what is most comforting, and what is like literally like childhood core to who I am, in the sense of like this brings me calm, this brings me a sense of safety, like I am not going to like the world isn't going to end, you know, like just kind of there's like that little tiny bit of hope and faith that is like always wrapped up within that. So so in terms of my journey with this, yeah, sorry, hand raising.
I didn't want to like rudely interrupt you. So the parent in your family that practiced Buddhism was your mom or your dad, or both?
Both of them. But my dad was often like, it was Japan, so like working late. Like it would be very seldom that I would see him come home during the week. I would only see him pretty much on the weekends.
It was Japan, so my dad worked late.
That's like culture. Like,
oh, okay, cool. All right.
Like, especially I think especially at the time, like kind of like men, like working men, like they would work and then they would, you know, there's like a lot of like, I don't know, nomikai and things like that. Like people would go drinking together. My dad didn't drink, but I'm assuming like they would still like hang out, and there would be like kind of like a lot of like workplace community building, but like that's um, kind of like a part of the culture.
Oh my God, like Community Tampa Bay?
Kind of. but
Or workplace community building. What else?
I don't know. It just feels different, so I'm gonna say I don't know.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. I can see the difference in what you're saying. Right, it's almost like
maybe a little bit less gendered. I don't know.
Over here.
Maybe I don't know. Yeah, I think.
No. Okay, yeah. Okay, so thanks. Just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
But then I think growing up, so one of the things I think in that process was I had kind of like a ambivalent relationship. Is that ambivalent is the right word? Like back and forth, like I love hate kind of, or like I'm like I feel positively and also like torn relationship with chanting and with the sect of Buddhism I was brought up in, because I loved listening to my mom chant when I'm going to bed at night, and at the same time I'm like, yo, like sitting on my knees like on the floor and like having to like, so memorizing the gongyo, like the basically it's like the 13th century Japanese translation of one of the sutras, and then it's like literally like, okay, like I have to like read this and like memorize it, and then I'm like sitting there for like for like a 5-year-old sitting there for like 30 minutes to an hour, closer to an hour, doing chanting, and then doing gongyo one time, Hoben Jigage, and then doing like the second verse that includes the longer version, and doing that, and then doing 3 more prayers after that, and like it's like, okay, like enough, like why do we have to repeat this so many times? Like there's a lot of those kinds of feelings. Like it's like we're doing the same thing over and over again, like what is the purpose of this?
It's all tedious.
It felt very tedious, and then so definitely like lots of feelings of like I don't want to chant, I don't want to chant. And it's like make it, you gotta chant. So definitely like all that. I think, and then I think as I got older, and especially like being in the States, going through any town and like starting to have a lot more explicit conversations around identity, maybe not to the extent that I do now, but like starting that process, I think there was a lot of critical processes that I started having internally for myself, where I was like, oh, like going to some of the meetings, I was like, ooh, like there's a lot of faithism that I experienced, where it was just like there was a lot of talking crap about, like, in a sense, it was like it wasn't so much of like an internal exploration of spirituality and using faith as a way of necessarily self-improvement. Sometimes it felt a lot of times like almost like bad mouthing and talking about other religions and how much better this religion was. And I was like, ooh, like where is this coming from? Like what is the purpose behind this? And I felt that being something that I did not enjoy. And I had different experiences based off of where I was. So like when I would go visit my dad, it was kind of just like a part of our daily life, and we would just chant and do gongyo and everything, go to meetings. I would find that the meetings I went to there were like on a much higher level in terms of like, I don't know, interpretation of, of like written literature and things like that, and like kind of like grappling with like a lot of like concepts and like really thinking through things. And I was like, I always felt energized. But in general, like most of my life, kind of growing up being in Florida, my experience was a little bit different. And so I started to become more distant from the organized religion aspect of the faith I was brought up in.
Mm.
So that's kind of where I was at. And then over time, I'm kind of now starting to, my mom has passed. So she's no longer the one who's saying, Masa, you need to chant, you need to chant, you need to chant. And so now I'm in kind of, because of all that sort of distance from the organized aspect of things and sort of that external pressure, now I'm starting to kind of come back to it on my own terms, and sort of engage in the way that I find beneficial for myself. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
You had a university experience, right? At a specific.
Yes. Yeah.
That was a faith-based university, or?
Yeah, the curriculum.
The school curriculum was secular. What was I saying? That at the university, it was a secular curriculum, but the majority of the students and the majority of the administration were Buddhist, of this particular sect of Buddhism. And so.
What sect is that?
SGI, Soka Gakkai International. And so one of the things that I noticed was it was really challenging. And I think this is the piece, right, of like how we need to check ourselves, like regardless of this is getting into the political stuff again, but we need to check ourselves, right? Even though like Buddhists, as like in the United States as a whole, might be a minority, at the same time at that school, within the context of the administration, the majority of the student body, there is privilege and power there. And because of that, it was a situation where there was, I think, preferential treatment. If certain administrators or certain teachers who were part of the organization or who fit into, who had that kind of right, they would receive certain amounts of preferential treatment or, kind of like benefit of the doubt, even from students, right? So from a student perspective, there's power and accountability, especially at such a small school where students can organize, and with a student body of about with fewer than 400 students, if you have 100 students organizing, right, that's a quarter of the school, right? If you think about larger universities and what that looks like, if a quarter of a school organizes, that's a lot of power, right?
Right.
But it was hard to do because we couldn't get that many students on board, because at the end of the day, there would be that sense of we would slack on the accountability piece. It would be that sense of, I go to meetings with this person, I know that they're a good person, so therefore we're not going to push or pressure or do anything in this way, right?
Infamous good person.
Yes. So it's one of those things that I definitely had a rough experience there. I ended up leaving before I finished because of how ultimately I was depressed for a lot of different reasons, but that was definitely a major contributing factor, was the sense of powerlessness that I felt in that space. I think a lot of the feeling that I had was, if I can't make a difference here with such a small community, what difference can I make in the larger community? If I'm trying to end all forms of discrimination, if I'm trying to contribute to this much broader movement or bigger issues, if I can't even organize and contribute at this small school, then what am I really doing with my life?
Right.
So that was a really low point for me.
Right. Sorry to hear that, man. Recently though, they're doing some, by university specifically, right? They're doing some.
Yeah, there's a lot more. Yeah, there's a lot more students of color.
A lot more Black students, a lot more non-Buddhist students, and so sort of that, because there's a lot more, yes, diversity, but diversity and also solidarity within that diversity. The students of color, all the different affinity groups have banded together, and they're actually calling out a lot of the anti-Black racism that exists on campus, and organizing around that. And they've been really, really they've made some moves, where faculty are attending conferences that they've hosted and that they've actually organized themselves, all organized by the students.
Very nice.
So lots of amazing stuff that's happening there now.
Good. That's really strong. But it begs the question for me, if given what I know about Buddhism, right, and that is a fairly limited knowledge that I have, what is, does it surprise you that such a culture was developed around a philosophy, a religion, a spirituality that is supposed to come from a place of, in my understanding, supposed to come from a place of compassion and selflessness? Or am I wrong in understanding the religion itself?
No, I think this kind of gets into,
I think I'm going to throw this question back at you to also kind of explore from a interfaith perspective, right? But I think one of the things that I noticed within the particular sect of Buddhism that and again, I think because there's so many different sects, there's so many different traditions and ways of observing and practicing any religion that has certain foundations, they're all going to be very, very different. But I think one of the things I noticed in where I grew up was there was sort of this evangelical component to it. Like there's a lot of this sense of there is a certain supremacy and faithism that I think is in it that, again, I see in other religions, I've seen in other religions where it's like, there's this sense of like, I'm doing it for your own good, kind of, right? So like, I've had folks when I moved to the States and like being in a majority Christian country, definitely people who would say like, I'm praying for you, you know, and they're coming from a place of, in their minds, good intentions, and the impact is, you know, for me, it's like, you're not speaking to me and you're not connecting with me in the way that I need. You're centering yourself in your attempt to support me, to console me, to inspire me. And so
the sect you're talking about.
The sect. And I think and I've seen that with, you know, Christianity and with other religions as well, but I think like that element of self-centering is something that I remember growing up with, and in terms of that sense of like, this is like, we need to be the ones that bring this to the world. And that's almost that sense of, I don't know, that sense of, that's something that always bothered me. And I think it bothered me more, especially after, because of the amount of cross-cultural and interfaith conversations that I was having with folks, and then realizing like, oh, like, this is not consistent with my lived experience. So, but I'm wondering, because, and this is kind of the same thing, like if I'm thinking about like, this is not the same sect, right? But there's also, you know, Buddhists in I think, right, Burma, right?
Myanmar.
In Myanmar, who are persecuting, you know, the Rohingya. So like, there's that's also like something that absolutely does not jive from a very, very, like, it's like literally, it's like, oh, we're talking about like genocide, you know?
Right.
And it's very inconsistent with, I think, a lot of people's perspective of like, oh, like, Buddhists, you're so peaceful. And it's like, this is.
And that's like, I think, an interesting yet jarring perspective in terms of like, when we think about Myanmar, like, and everything that they've been through, right? With colonialism and so on. So with China, and, you know, like just a lot of conflict that they've had, and the manner in which they've handled themselves. Is it Myanmar or is it Tibet, Masu? Myanmar.
Are you talking about for China?
Tibet.
For China, Tibet. I'm talking about Myanmar for the Rohingya. Yeah, it's Myanmar, correct. Because even a lot of like humanitarians, like social justice activists who have been like activating for all their lives to protect Buddhist monks from this, you know, from attacks of colonialism, like vicious, violent attacks of colonialism, so on and so forth, have gone against the Rohingya Muslims and justified the violence toward them. You know, justified the violence toward them with ideas of like cleanliness and things like that. It's just so far-fetched from anything else that they themselves have practiced, you know. And there's stories that were coming out of Myanmar which might not have hit mainstream media and stuff about monks engaging in said behavior and so on and so forth. So there's just politically, when you look at it, I think it really depends on, I don't know, man. I think it really depends on who you are at the end of the day. Because that I don't know why toward that. So it's not like I'm surprised that this is happening to Muslims. Okay, like this has been happening to Muslims forever and for always, right? Like even India and the creation of Pakistan is a whole other story about ousting Muslims. It's not just about creation of a new country. It's about getting rid of a certain peoples, right? And that's a displacement. That is, when partition happened in 1947, we displaced a whole bunch of we displaced an entire population of people, right? And we're talking about India. So you know that's like in the hundreds and thousands of people. And that, if think about like the numbers of people needed to populate an entire country, that's how many people we displaced, right? And so genocide, in terms of both active violence and displacement, also considered an act of violence, right, towards Muslim populations, is not something unheard of. But the level of violence that Rohingya Muslims have faced from communities that are otherwise considered highly peaceful themselves, not just like, you know, that idea of, oh my God, you must be so Zen because you're Buddhist, right? Not that like surface level idea, but communities that have practiced peace and nonviolence. That was very shocking. That was very jarring for me personally. I hope it was jarring for other humans, you know, like no one should look at that level of violence and be like, well, that's normal, I guess, right? Like, so it was incredibly jarring. So yeah, I don't know where we were going with that, but
well, and I guess and I think that's kind of the thing.
It's sort of like for me, this gets into that sort of religious journey piece of it. And I guess my question for you would be, what does your religious journey look like? And have you had those kinds of experiences of like trying to navigate like the aspects of the faith and faiths that you were brought up in that are things that fulfill you spiritually and are consistent with you versus the things that are jarring or feel inconsistent? Because I know for me, that's something where I'm like, I have been, and I'm still on that journey of navigating that. Like, I still have mixed feelings. Like, I'm still struggling to like, you know, pick apart the structure and institution from the things that fulfill me spiritually and are deeply held, right? Mm. And I'm wondering what that's, how your experience has been, if that's happened with you, if you've had a similar experience or different experience with that.
I'm definitely working through all of that constantly. So I was raised Hindu on my mom's side, Muslim on my dad's side. My relationship with my mother's side and the manner in which I was raised was very, very positive, and very like loving and compassionate. And there's no fear-based, right? And I come from a family of matriarchal women. So we are a very strong family of women, right? A family of very strong women, right? My granddad used to say, if your aunt and your grandmother wanted to, they could take over the world and we'd all be the better for it, right? Because that's how powerful those two women are. And again, just pointing out that I speak about my grandparents in the present tense. They have passed, but I speak about my grandparents in the present tense. And so my grandmother always like, so I'm listening to your story about chanting, right? Oh my God, why are we doing this again and again? And there's so much and blah, blah, blah. And I had like, I think that's why it's so important how we teach religion, because I also used to like wake up in the morning. So I used to spend my summer holidays at my grandparents' house in Kerala. And they have like a big house, like a mansion that sits on like an acre and a half of land. And so it's beautiful, right? And you got the hills in front, you got a lake in the back, you got fields on the side, and it's just gorgeous. It's absolute paradise. So I used to love going there. And one of the traditions that I would have, my grandmother would pray she would light the lamp every morning And she would pray every morning. Like she had like full puja, like full prayer rituals, right? And so she also woke up really early, so it wasn't every day that I was doing this, but fairly regularly, right? I loved sitting with her and praying, right? And so she would engage me in her prayer space. You know, she'd be like, do this with that, put this there, you know, like, because it's a ritual, right? So offer this like this, hold your hand like that, pour this on top of that. She'd give me all these directions. So it was fun for me too, because I was learning. But as a kid, I always had a thing for languages. So I would do all the shlokas with her, like all the prayers with her. And I loved doing it because it was a new language. It's Sanskrit, so nobody speaks it, right? Sanskrit or Malayalam. Nobody speaks it. Malayalam we speak. And like my grandmom she'd always like reference some story with it. So it was always like fun for me to learn, you know, and she'd always reference that story because she'd always tell me stories. We'd have like our afternoon naps or like before going to sleep or whatever it is. She'd tell me like a bedtime story in the afternoon. She would tell me a bedtime story. And it was always something about this like powerful goddess or Kali, Durga, blah, blah, you know, like powerful goddess. And she would tell me about, then on the local TV station, there used to be, so both Ramayana and Mahabharata, which are two of our epics, right, that tell stories of mythology. So in Hindu mythology, those are two epics. So like long poems, but they're just really long. When they're saying long poems, they mean really long. So think like the Odyssey, like that, right? Like it's an epic. And so there's a TV show that depicts that, like whatever you call, I don't know what you call, like a historical depiction of it, right? And so we'd sit and watch that every afternoon, you know, and it was all about like spending time with my grandmom. Like I love my grandparents to death. So my granddad's an atheist, my grandmom's a pious Hindu. So there's a lot of interesting conversations that always happen in the house. Very intelligent, a lot of like, I think I learned how to navigate conflict from both of them because no two humans ever lived that loved each other the way that my grandparents loved each other, but they were so the opposite in their faith beliefs. And my grandmom's also like, that is her most visible identity for her, is her faith tradition, right? And then she has an atheist husband. And so they would always have these amazing conversations, you know, that then as we grew older, the grandchildren engaged in, you know, my mom and her sisters always engaged in. It was just always, but it was a fun conversation around many great points, many excellent points that never preyed upon anybody else's beliefs, right? Like that I statements thing, hardcore happened with my grandparents. I don't even think they knew that it was a communication strategy or conflict resolution strategy, but they always came from the I, right? Anyway, so like all of this stuff would happen. So I had so much fondness for my grandparents. I loved my grandmother, right? I take after my grandfather, but I really loved, like I have such a fondness for my grandmother. So this was all about like spending time with her. And as I was spending time with her, given the human that she is, the manner in which she taught came from so much compassion. So she'd teach me these bedtime stories, and then she'd weave that. If I was doing prayers with her the next morning, she'd weave that into the prayers that we did. Because there's so many prayers, right? So she'd like choose those prayers, and she'd say, remember the story I told you last night? This is that story. And she'd read a line, and then she'd tell me what it meant. And then she'd read a line, and then she'd tell me what it meant, you know? So she would give me translations for every line, right? As literal as she could get with it. If it was Sanskrit, it was a little bit, it was a little more difficult to understand for me. So because I didn't understand Sanskrit, but I don't, she would translate for me. But if it was Malayalam, she would do like, what do you think that means? Like that. So my language skills were also building with Malayalam, right? There's so much going on there. It's just so positive. It's so good. And she would include me in the traditions. It was just such an inclusive, holistic process. She would explain to me everything, why we were doing the things we were doing from start to finish. And my grandmother would always end every single one of her prayer sessions with the first kalima, right, in Islam. The first kalima is like the first. If I say this wrong, my Muslim friends are going to kill me. So I'm not going to say anything about it, right? But like kalimas are like part of the prayer process. Okay, it's part of, it's, I think this is how like I would translate it. I think it's like the 10 Commandments, you know, or I think it's like Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, like that, you know, and knowing what they stand for and all of that, right? So it's a foundational component of Islam, right? So my grandmother memorized, because my father is Muslim. When my mother married my father, my grandparents on both sides of the family got along really well with each other. And my grandparents from my dad's side visited my grandparents from my mom's side in Kerala. And when they did, they gave her this, this token, right? Which is typically like, it looks like foil that is framed and there's a prayer written on it. Okay, so you can't actually like see it, right? But there's a prayer written on it. And we have that in my parents' house as well. Okay, so I'm fairly confident it's a prayer written on it. Anything that I reference as far as Islam is concerned, I hope everybody knows, much of it will be wrong, because my relationship with Islam is not as close, is nowhere as close as my relationship with Hinduism. So all of these things are things that I either remember somebody told me, and I'm hoping they told me right, or, you know, like it's coming up in this conversation and I haven't clarified it before because I never saw the need to in that moment. I will now, right? So she's got that. She's got this framed prayer, right? And so she has that my grandparents gave her. And then I don't know from where she got it. I know she's told me the story, but from somewhere she got this this sculpture. Well, it's a plastic bottle, basically, that's supposed to contain holy water, okay? And it's of Mother Mary and baby Jesus. Okay, so my grandmom will always end all of her prayer sessions with the first kalima from Islam, and she would end with the Lord's Prayer from Christianity. So that way, like for her, Hinduism is my primary forte of understanding and connecting with God, but this is my homage to all other religions, because every religion is simply teaching us how to be better human beings. That's where I came from on my mother's side. Very boss, right? Very lovely. Yeah. Were there like certain issues, gender identity, blah, 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 entering temples, not being able to wear this, you know, like so on and so forth? Of course there were, you know, as expected. But the manner of teaching has still stuck with me, that even for like Vishu, Malayali New Year's, when I did my prayers for the first time and I set up the altar in the way that you're supposed to set it up and all that, and I prayed. I haven't prayed in years, and all of my slokas just come to me like that. Like they just don't leave me. Like I know all of them. Even when I went back to India and we went to a temple to do a certain ritual, the priest was like, he's like, repeat after me, and he's saying the prayer, right? And I'm saying it with him because I already know it. You know, I remember it, you know? And so he was very surprised because I look the way that I look, and then I'm like reciting these slokas, you know? So from that perspective. Now, on my father's side, it's a completely different story altogether, right? My father's side and I are not close. I'm close-ish, right? So I'm close to my cousins, but I don't consider myself close to my father's family, right? Like I consider myself close to my mother's family. I don't consider myself close to my father's family. And when I was growing up, my dad and I don't have the best relationship. So when I was growing up, I really wanted my dad to like me. So I figured like if I was, there's like a lot of context in this. If I was, it wasn't coming from a place of, oh my God, faith, I want to engage in this faith tradition. I was a kid, you know, like that was not like my first priority, right? But I really wanted my dad to like me. So I thought if I was a really good Muslim girl, he would like me more. And so like I must have been like 10, 11 years oldish. It was my family, my dad, my mom, and myself, and then my dad's sister, her husband, and both her children who were living in our house. Okay, so they had moved in with us, right? And so we were all living together. And so at whatever given point in time, I was like, Ramadan was coming up, and I said I wanted to fast. You know, like I want to learn prayers, I wanted to engage with Islam, right? And it was a completely different experience from my mom's side of the family. You know what I'm saying? And that ruined my relationship with Islam for a good long time. It was so oppressive, where my grandmom would explain every single sentence of every single prayer to me. If I asked a question, I would get yelled at on my dad's side of the family, you know? And like, they would question my faith. I didn't even have any faith at that point, you know, like I'm learning, right? But like this whole thing of, you should not ask questions, you know, like this is who Allah is. You have no right to ask questions. You have to be respectful to blah, blah, blah. This is what he says, so this is what he will do. And I know it's definitely, this is what he says and this is what you will do and all of that. And I know it's definitely coming from a fully, now I know, in hindsight, as an adult, I have the competence to know that it's coming from a gender patriarchal cultural perspective, right? Cultural familial perspective. That was my family and that's how they chose to teach Islam. Does not mean that that's what Islam preaches. Does not mean that that is what the religion is all about. But where I was in my life at that point, I was led to believe that it was all about discipline and categorically showing me what my place was and that you are not allowed to ask any questions, right? And that at the forefront of it is that you must fear God. If you do not fear God, your faith doesn't hold any value. It's completely worthless. That's the space that I was coming from. And now in hindsight, I know it was, you must fear me, or I will not teach you the things that you need to know, right? You are dependent on me for your study of a religion that you are born into. Therefore, you must fear me. You must respect me. You must not ask me questions, because asking me questions is as good as questioning your faith. And the one thing that I truly believe is that in anything that you believe in, right, especially anything that values a democratic process, you must always question and then come back to the same conclusion. You know, nothing is infallible. You must constantly work to prove, that what you believe in is believable. You know, and I don't think like questioning your faith is a bad thing. I think it is a quest to show that your faith is strong. It is a quest to show that not your faith, but the faith is strong. It is a quest to show that I am willing to evolve. It's a quest to show that I am willing to be wrong about something. You know, it's humility, right? It's humility, it's learning, it's constant evolution.
There's so much I'm noticing also, like
I'm thinking of, even as we're having this conversation about process and questioning, and in the fact that we're still having, we're doing hard conversations, and like literally what this process is, right, is that humility in that process of like, I think this is a bit of a tangent, but it's like almost the concept of wokeness, right? Of like, there's a destination to arrive at, and like you have to be fixed and static in that place, as opposed to, no, they're like, we are constantly learning. We constantly have to verify and check ourselves and be in that process. And when we stop being in that process, that's the issue, as opposed to,
Yeah. I think when we're entitled to think that we're allowed to stop being in that process, there's that entitlement of it's not like, okay, I'm going to stop now because like, this is too much for me. I can't do anymore. It's not that realization. It's more like, I'm going to stop now because I'm a G at this. Like, nobody can question me on this. Like this is my, that feeling, that clout, because of, I am no longer questionable, like having that, I think, level of entitlement, right? So that was what it was like growing up, and that damaged my relationship heavily with Islam. I'm trying to rebuild that relationship now. I've been trying for the last few years. And when I say trying, I don't mean like it's not progressing. I'm still doing the work. So I wouldn't call it a success. It's just a lot of years of damage, to recover from. And there's a lot of, even in like studying it, there's just so much that you have to question from like a cultural perspective. Okay, where is this author coming from? What is this interpretation from? What are the biases that could be informing their interpretation? You have to think about all of those things, right? And then like coming from a queer lens, like where does this fall, right? And then I definitely have Muslim friends and Muslim comrades, right? Who are doing great work and understand and have been studying the religion for, significant amounts of time. I'm just not ready to engage in those conversations yet until I've done my due diligence, because I don't want them to have to hold space for my emotions, right? And I'm triggered by like things that I don't know I will be triggered by when I read text, you know? So when I'm reading, when I'm studying, you know, it just brings a lot of things that I don't even know sometimes that I have up there, back to center. And so just working through all of those issues, you know, and like, there are some things also, like reading these interpretations, it's not necessarily that they're coming from a place of policy or political space, right? Which is like how I understand things best. In context of Islam, that's how I understand it best. I understand it from an identity-based political perspective, because that is what drove me away from it. That identity-based political perspective, right? Because like the person was political, so everything, when I look back, even though then I might not have known that it was political for me, and it might not have been political for me then, right? And I think I can safely say it wasn't political for me then, but it is political for me now. And I can't separate those two, and I don't want to. Like, this is who I am now, right? Like, what's the point of going back to when I was 11 years old and thinking I should think from that perspective? Why? This is the person now who's studying this, you know? So like, there's just a lot of reconciliation that I'm trying to do. And it's a long process, you know, because it's a big religion. It's like, it's old, and it's rich, and it has so much heritage to it. And so like understanding what was written when, understanding why something was interpreted in a certain way, what was happening then to inform it in a certain way, you know? There is a lot of like political shift that dictates how something is translated, or how something is taught, or how something is looked at. You have to be very cautious where you're getting that from. Otherwise, you'll read something in Hinduism that will 100% translate something from a very caste-based perspective. You know, and even though like there might not have been caste when the Vedas are written, if you are influenced by that and you're the person translating it, you might very well translate it with an explicit bias in place. Or an implicit bias in place, sorry. You may translate it explicitly with an implicit bias in place, let's say that, you know? So there's a lot of those things to consider. Plus, like, Hinduism and Islam are so different from each other, right? There's, you know, like there's idol worship in Hinduism. Idol worship is something that is considered complete, like, bastardization of religion in Islam, you know? There's queerness in Hinduism. I haven't seen that in Islam, right? Perhaps there is. There's like a lot of very progressive Muslim queers out there who are hardcore about their religion and hardcore about their queerness as well. You know, the representations just look differently, right? And again, because I don't understand it, you know, I'm exploring. So, because I know it'll show up in my own interpretation in some place, and that is more than enough for me. You know what I mean? I don't need somebody else's interpretation of queer religion for me, right? The fact that I am engaged in the process of studying that religion in itself queers it, right? So like things like that, you know, thinking about things like that. What is that? Idol worship, blah, 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 queerness. There's a couple of other things that just that are very, very different from each other. And then I was also raised in a predominantly Christian school. So there's like that Christianity that comes into play, which was so easy for me to access because I spoke the language. You know, hashtag what up colonialism, you know? So, but I also learned Christianity in a very accessible, compassion-based place, you know? Like I did not know the political contexts around all of it, did not know the political leverage of Christianity in colonialism, like at all. Right? Until you get like 10th grade world history and you're like, I'm sorry, what's happening right now? You know? But even then you don't like necessarily make that connection between the two. You know? But my parents were very open. They were very, I studied everything. I learned everything as best I could. There was no imposition from my parental units in terms of what religion I had to choose. right? To a certain extent. It was mostly like extended family on my father's side, not on my mother's side. Then at some point, my dad found God. I don't know what was going on in his life. I was too young to recognize any of the signs or whatever. But at some point, my dad found God, and then it was like we used to eat pork. I was still eating meat, right? At that point, we used to eat pork. Dad used to eat pork just fine. I don't know if this is gonna get him in trouble with any of his family, but so be it. He used to, and then suddenly he found God, and like he started going to Friday prayers, Jummah prayers, diligently every week, something like that. I remember him starting to go to prayers, never going to prayers before, and then starting to go to prayers, and then. I remember he got a taviz, which is like a protection amulet that we wear, right? So he got a taviz, and then we're having this conversation. He's like, "Yeah, I don't want you eating pork anymore." It's like, "But why?" Because I say so. So that's like it's not like my dad is unlike his family. He's very much like his family. Because of who my mom is, he didn't get to impose religion on me. But suddenly, like all of this was happening. It was just mad complicated, dude. Like there was just like so many layers, so many different things going on in the middle of this, my masculinity, and like there's just like so much going on to navigate. And so I don't even remember what your initial question was. I'm so sorry.
This is exactly that.
Navigating like taking, right, and finding value in, but at the same time,
right.
Struggle. Are there points of struggle? Are there points of how do we interpret it? Because I think that's something that, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's cool. I think I've always held on to Hinduism. Hinduism has always had a very positive aspect in my life. I've always held space for it, because for me, it's not about the religion. It's about my grandmother and my grandfather and what they taught me, right? It's about them, So I've been to so many temples and all that, because like that's what my grandmom and I used to do. That was us spending time together. Right? And so it was such a valuable experience that impacted the rest of my life in ways that I didn't know it would. It was just me hanging out with my grandma, and it had such a heavy spiritual impact on my life. So Hinduism I've always held. Christianity, I know well. I like to study it as a subject of knowledge, as a trace of history, pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial history. I don't necessarily feel any sort of affinity toward it. I think it teaches some really vast things. I think there is so much similarity between what it teaches, what Christianity teaches, and similarity between Christianity and other religions and what it teaches. And with Islam, my relationship is really conflicted and very broken. And so Ramadan's coming up, like certain things that I'll do are like, as of year before last, I started fasting the first day and the last day of Ramadan. And I don't tell my family about any of that, because I don't want them to get all hype about, oh my God, she's trying to be Muslim. I'm not. I'm really not. I'm trying to repair a relationship that shouldn't have been broken to begin with. And so I will do it. I want to do it the way I want to do it. And so that helps me. I really like Ramadan because like all of the things that it puts into place and requires you to do really requires you to just stop and make time for certain things. So while I do not do the traditional customs that you're meant to do during Ramadan, right? Like prayers, I don't do prayers, right? I do other things that make me feel spiritually complete. I do other things that center me, that I need for myself to engage in that spiritual space, So, and it helps me because I also study during that month. So it helps me not just study, but it also helps me center my spirituality, which is not rooted or does not find need to be labeled within any particular faith tradition. That's where I am right now. That was a long drawn explanation.
It's complicated. There's 3 different traditions, major traditions that are
influencing. So there is a lot to explore. But I feel like I know we're probably at time, but I feel like a lot of that resonates. I think one of the things that I'm taking away is almost like kind of what you were saying also about like it's not necessarily the religion for either thing, right? It's the relationship, and like, and a lot of times like the relationship can help channel and exemplify what we can take from the faith and how we can internalize it, and at the same time it can also be used as a way of distorting it into being something that's very ego driven.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think there's that hierarchical space in all religions. You know what I mean? Like I remember my uncle telling me, my uncle and another aunt of mine telling me that once you engage with Islam, you can't go to any temples. You can't, like, you've sacrificed, you've given up all of those other things for Islam. It means you're showing your commitment to Islam. That's what drove me away from it. Because no going to temple means no hanging out with Amma. And that's just not, that's like 0 point of compromise for me there. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, so I think like all of those, there's just a lot of demanded sacrifice with zero investment in my knowledge. You know, so yeah, I definitely think it can make or break. I don't know where it comes from, this, well, it's a dumb thing to say. Of course I know where it comes from, but this like wanting to be the better religion and assuming that there is definitely in all religions an assumption that people are only going to ascend to heaven if they follow this path. No other path leads to God but this path. And that troubles me. No, I don't know who we are to say that. I don't believe it in my heart, in my heart, in my spirituality. I can't believe that. How restrictive to believe that there's only one path to a higher being. What do you think about that?
I think that was kind of the point for me of
departure.
Separating departure was grappling with like friends I had who were part of other traditions, and kind of again like that sense of like, here's a person who adds so much meaning to my life, and in many cases are mentors to me, or folks who have cared for me in some cases, in a lot of ways, you know, more so. Like I feel like some of these folks have exemplified
exactly what I'm kind of seeking in terms of spirituality, and so it's like to say that no, they have it wrong. I'm like, that seems very misguided. You know, it didn't seem like it was. It didn't make sense, you know, for me. And I think that was something that I started noticing I had when I started having more interfaith conversations and hearing other people's spiritual experiences and journeys. I noticed that it was helping me, as opposed to, it didn't confuse me. It didn't reduce commitment necessarily. Like maybe in some ways, because it was a false commitment, it was like a commitment without explanation. It was a commitment without real consent, you know, kind of in what you were explaining, right? Like the sense of like, it's demanded, but without any investment. But I also feel like that's where my different experiences, like even as you're talking about the different experiences across different religions, but that's again based off of your experiences and like in your families. In the same way, even within my own family, it's like, because my parents separated, I got to experience, still from a US perspective, right? It's different in different countries, different in Japan. I wouldn't be able to function in Japan. Because the culture also informs the way that the religion is practiced, right?
Exactly.
Right? So Japan is extremely gendered. Like it's like men and women are very like, and that's come into the States in terms of there is a separation between men and women in terms of like meetings in groups. You know, not all, but like there's particular spaces. But it's coming not so much from a like a minority identity perspective, like kind of in the say about creating like space for, you know, people of color, women, but it's more so it felt much more of like this is just the binary and this is what we're reinforcing, right?
Right.
So it definitely like carries over, but in terms of, again, the difference between being in Florida versus being in California and seeing like the difference there, like there is a cultural interpretation and manifestation and a relational manifestation of how we practice. And I feel like that made a huge impact on me, of seeing that like, oh, when I'm in this space, like I feel more fulfilled. I feel like I'm freer. I feel like I'm allowed to explore and question.
Right.
In this space, I don't feel that way.
Right.
Why is that? What's going on here?
Yeah, no, I think definitely that cultural aspect is really, really important. Like there's just a lot of ways in which I was taught Islam that are very Indian, like very true to Indian familial culture. You know, that again doesn't necessarily, while it imposes itself upon the religion, does not mean that the religion imposes those behaviors upon us. You know, and I think it took me a really long time to identify that difference too. I was definitely one of those humans growing up who was like, I don't want to be a Muslim. You know, like I had an aversion for Islam. You know, and then I had to realize I have an aversion toward my family and the way that I was taught it. I don't know anything about religion. Why would I have an aversion toward it? That makes no sense. You know? So, yeah. Man, so complicated, no? It's beautiful, though. We make it complicated. It's complex. We make it complicated. Complexity is a beautiful thing. Yeah. Well, this was Boss. Thank you.
I'm also, because of
these consistent conversations, I'm like, let me invest in some incense. Let me invest in. I'm like, I need to spruce up my altar. You know.
Right. Heard.
I've got my makeshift altar situation. So
I don't know if I was preparing for the apocalypse and incense was on my list. I know I went out and bought a whole bunch of rice and dal and stuff like that, but I have so much incense that I did not realize I have. It's ridiculous. If you ever need some, just let me know. I will leave it at your doorstep.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Masa, for this conversation. This was amazing. I really appreciate it.
You appreciate it. No, this is Boss.
Always
enjoy this.
Yeah, and hopefully, you know, people will enjoy this and they'll have more questions about this. And who knows? Let's see. Maybe these are conversations we should be taking later. Yeah. We'll give them some thought as we move into our potential next 30 days of programming. Right? Woo-hoo. All right. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you.